Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate you taking the time today to join us for our webinar, Match Your Workload to the Best Cloud. What we'd like to do first is introduce to you the panelists that will be presenting today, and then follow through with some of the overview of the complexities of both hybrid and multi-cloud approaches, some objectives and strategies you can use when you consider homing your workloads and your applications in the right location. And last but not least, some strategies that you can emphasize within your plan to minimize or de-risk your cloud migration and journey. We'll wrap with a quick overview of Otava's services offerings. But with that said, let's jump into our panelists. We're joined today by some esteemed colleagues here from VMware. Patrick, let's start with you. Could you provide a brief introduction for the group?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here again. Patrick Verhoeven, I'm a cloud solutions strategist with VMware, work very closely with the Otava team to really kind of help them build their cloud services portfolio and go-to-market strategy.
Thank you, Patrick. And Sean, over to you, sir. I think we might have lost Sean. We'll give him a moment to rejoin. In the interim, Jason, could you introduce yourself, sir?
Sure. Good morning. Good afternoon. My name is Jason Pullman. I'm the pre-sales architecture director here at Otava. I've been with the company now for 5 years, about 25 years of IT experience, and hoping to give you some ideas today how to de-risk your cloud journey.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I think Sean's still in the process of rejoining here. So let's, with that said, let's dive in. So one of the things we've often heard right in the marketplace, and I'm sure is now commonplace discussions for many of you joining us today, is the concept of digital transformation. So Patrick, if I could ask you, can you walk us through really VMware's perspective in digital transformation, where that journey is leading, and how you see the industry responding and reacting to that?
Yeah, absolutely, Jeremy. And again, thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts here. You know, so certainly almost every customer is on some type of digital transformation journey, right? But what we also know is that this is not easy, right? This journey can be quite complex, right? Where we often see customers embracing hybrid cloud design patterns where they're looking to deploy workloads both on-prem as well as in the cloud, right? For lots of reasons that we're going to talk about here today. So what they're really looking for there is a common IT control plane that enables interoperability and workload portability between environments, right? But certainly, you know, what we also see, Jeremy, if you can build the next item there, is, you know, we know that customers are also deploying workloads into native hyperscale public clouds, right, for lots of reasons. AWS has built out a very deep, rich set of services, right, 180 services, right? So if you're looking to do things like machine learning and artificial intelligence, right, there's a really rich set of capabilities there. And honestly, the third build there, Jeremy, if you could build that out, is many times customers, as part of that digital transformation journey, honestly, are starting to look beyond cloud, right? How do they move beyond infrastructure? How do they start to modernize their applications? How do they start to deploy, you know, a container-based application with a microservices architecture, all orchestrated through Kubernetes? Or how do we start to leverage, you know, new emergent technology to capture data out at the edge of the network, right? And process some of that data out before we pull it back, you know, into a centralized location for some of those analytics. So there's lots of variations and lots of permutations here, you know, as customers embark on this. And again, it's not easy, which is why, you know, what we see is increasingly customers turning to partners like Otava to kind of guide them on this journey, right? There's a lot of nuance here, and it's really important to kind of understand, you know, the pros and the cons and the trade-off decisions between all of this. Now, the other thing I would share, Jeremy, is, you know, while this may be a complex journey, right, what we also see is that, you know, typically the starting point of this journey is cloud, right? But I think what's interesting from my perspective is I kind of feel like we're at an inflection point in the industry, right? Where we're starting to move away from cloud first strategies to what many people now refer to as cloud smart strategies, right? We've already seen this, for example, with the US federal government, right? They talk a lot about, the fact that different clouds have different benefits, right? And we need to be thoughtful about which applications land in which cloud and what data do we deploy in which cloud for lots of different reasons, right? And when we think about cloud smart strategies, right, what we're really saying there is we're talking about hybrid and multi-cloud, right? We're really talking about understanding, which cloud endpoint do we use when. And you see some of the data here at the bottom of the slide, right? So IDC says, 93% of customers are using multi-cloud. But when we unpack that data, what we really see is there's lots of nuance there, right? In fact, the majority of customers that say they have a multi-cloud strategy are actually talking about some variation of on-prem, public-private cloud, right? And this is where hybrid cloud actually is a big piece of what we mean when we say multi-cloud. Now, there absolutely are cases where customers are all in on public cloud and maybe they're using multiple public clouds, but more often than not, right, when we start to think about the digital transformation journey and starting with cloud as that starting point, right? And as we start to look at, the pros and the cons that different clouds offer, I think one of the most important things that I would share with your audience is first and foremost, think about your hybrid cloud strategy, right? What do you have on-prem? How do you want to leverage the cloud? How do you enable that interoperability and that portability between environments, right? So that kind of at a high level, that's what we see on the VMware side.
No, that makes perfect sense, and thank you, Patrick. You hit on one key target there, right? Is how do we think about the consumption experience, right? When we think about a multi-cloud journey across one or more public, private, and hosted environments, what are some of the constructs that we see around the consumption experience? It strikes me that we could be introducing some complexities here that I'm sure we'll unpack here in a moment around multiple points of presence, multiple points of consumption. How do we simplify that process and experience a little bit?
Yeah, it's a great point, Jeremy. In fact, I was on a recent analyst briefing. I think it was 451 Research or Gartner, and they were saying, we all thought that cloud was going to simplify our lives, right? It really hasn't, right? It's added a lot of complexity into our lives, right? For lots of reasons, right? Pricing models are complex, services portfolios are very complex, right? So it's a very difficult path to navigate, and we're going to unpack some of the challenges I think with that. In some ways, clouds have become a lot less predictable than we thought, right? We all thought consumption-based models are going to create cost predictability. But man, I'm telling you, customers consuming hyperscale public clouds are getting bills that are 2, 3, 4 times higher than expected, right? Because of some of that complexity, right? And we'll unpack some of those challenges for sure as we go through the session. The other thing that might be relevant for your audience as well is I hear a lot of customers kind of stumble a little bit or struggle with understanding, hybrid versus multi-cloud. We kind of throw around these terms interchangeably, but they actually mean, from VMware's perspective, they mean very different things, right? So the way that we define hybrid cloud is, hybrid cloud fundamentally is about having a common IT control plane, right? Because we need bidirectional workload portability, right? We need interoperability. We want to leverage the same tooling and the same operating model, but we want to do that across cloud endpoints. Whereas when we talk about multi-cloud in the VMware world, what we really are talking about there are heterogeneous IT control planes, right? So this is where we start to talk about the fact that AWS, Azure, while they offer a lot of value, right, they are going to introduce a proprietary architecture. And the more that you start to consume those higher value platform services, right, you start to run into some of the challenges that you mentioned, right? The idea of getting locked in, the idea of controlling your costs, right? But certainly that's an important distinction, I think, to understand, is that hybrid cloud fundamentally is about building a business around a common IT control plane for lots of reasons. Multi-cloud is really about leveraging all of these cloud endpoints, recognizing that many of them are heterogeneous and will introduce complexity. But of course, with that complexity are benefits as well. So we always need to kind of weigh that trade-off decision between the benefit that a hyperscale public cloud provides versus the complexity that it's going to introduce into your environment.
Makes perfect sense. Thanks for that additional clarification there, Patrick. Let's now explore some of the reasons or drivers behind why organizations are seeking a multi-cloud journey or strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
Can
yeah.
you dive into this a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So this is some data from 451 Research, right? A great analyst that covers this market very well, and kind of what you see at a high level are, the five main drivers of hybrid cloud really revolve around, number one, cost optimization, right? Leveraging the efficiencies, the scale that cloud provides. Number two is, really extending your IT into the cloud, right? So, many customers don't have access to a lot of capital. They don't have the means to build out new data center capacity. And especially with things like COVID-19, increasingly we see customers trying to augment their data center with cloud. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're trying to get out of their data centers or get out of the data center business. They're simply trying to extend their business into cloud environments. Number three is kind of an extension of that, right? Where, it just doesn't make sense in today's world to be building out capacity for backup targets or for DR, right? Increasingly, we're going to be using the cloud to do that. Number four here is really the idea about how do I bring all of these disparate IT environments together under a single management framework, right? How do I build a single operating model that gives me visibility and management and tools across different estates and endpoints? And, that could be as simple as vCenter, but increasingly we see customers looking to embrace, services and capabilities that companies like Otava provide to really give you that central point of management, regardless of where those workloads are landing, right? It's to kind of free up your resources and give you that transparency and that visibility. And then the last one in the top five that I'll call out here is, and I touched on this a moment ago, is this whole idea about workload portability, right? As we think about hybrid cloud, we want to be thoughtful about, do we need to do a cold, warm, live migration, right? And what's really important here, what's becoming more and more important, I think, is the idea of reversibility as well. Business strategies change, right? And we do see some evidence of repatriation, for example, out of the hyperscale clouds, right? IDC will tell you that 85% of customers are experiencing some degree of repatriation. That doesn't mean they're pulling everything back, but due to latency, security, due to those bills that we talked about, right, that are 4 times higher than expected, right, business conditions change. So as all of you think about your hybrid cloud strategies, right, you need to be thoughtful about, do you have an exit strategy, or do you have reversibility, and how do you mitigate cloud vendor lock-in? And so we want to think a little bit about hybrid cloud through that lens as well. Is, we need to get those workloads into the cloud very seamlessly, quickly, and cost effectively, but we also don't want to lock ourselves in. So those from what we see, right, that very much resonates, I think, with the VMware experience.
So 2 points on here that were interesting to me, Patrick, were number one, we see smaller organizations, right? Sub 1,000 employees or so have a much higher business continuity disaster recovery, right? We think about CapEx avoidance. We think about, underutilization of traditionally segmented DR resources, et cetera. So for these smaller organizations, that seems to be of key interest. And the other interesting piece, you talked about vendor lock-in a little bit on the previous slide. 60% of organizations using more than one IaaS or PaaS provider, I think specifically for that reason.
Absolutely, yeah.
Any of these other trends that from a VMware perspective that you see becoming more and more predominant as we age through 21 into 22?
Yeah, like I said, certainly a shift from cloud first to cloud smart, right? That's a big one, right? Certainly a shift to looking at how do we modernize our environment, modernize our infrastructure, and modernize our apps. There are trade-off decisions there to be had for sure, right? And we'll talk a little bit about those as well. But at a macro level, those are the big things that I would say all of you want to be thinking about is, how are you going to, embrace the right cloud for the right environment? I think in some of the prior sessions, we talked a little bit about the economics of cloud and, some of the things that you need to be thinking about, right? So certainly, think about that from in terms of your strategies are, and then think a little bit about how are you going to innovate and grow your business, right? And that's where we start to get more into the modern apps modernization conversation. So at a macro level, those are probably the two big things that are top of mind for us.
So let's take a minute, right? Good current overview of the drivers. Where do we stand from current adoption, right? Where are we on that maturity curve, and where do we see that headed?
Yeah, so every analyst has a different viewpoint, right? Different data points. Here 451 will tell you that 58% of customers have a hybrid IT environment or strategy. The rest pretty much are either all in on-prem, all in on public cloud, or what we also see is siloed infrastructure where maybe they have some applications running off-prem, but they are really siloed and have no interoperability with that on-prem estate, right? So that's kind of what the current estate looks like according to 451. And if we take that 58% that do have a hybrid IT strategy, what we see there is 56% of them actually have a hybrid cloud implementation that's in place and that they're actively executing against that vision and strategy, right? The rest of the customers are in progress, right? They're considering it, they're developing plans. So we're very much kind of, a couple of innings into this, right? It is still early days. Many customers are still very much trying to figure out what is the right hybrid cloud strategy and how do we execute against that. But certainly there are many customers that are well down this path. And those customers that are well down this path, I think what we'll talk about here in a moment as well is some of the challenges that they're starting to run into now, right? Because, like anything, right, the devil's in the details, and sometimes these things are easier said than done. But certainly customers are embracing hybrid cloud as a strategy, but there certainly are some barriers to that.
Sure. No, makes perfect sense, and great segue into our next slide here, as you said, right? Some of the things that are holding us back, perhaps, from taking this journey, or at least putting a plan in place and executing against that plan. Let's unpack this a little bit, if you could, please, Patrick.
Yeah. So when we think about interoperability, workload portability, right, building a common operating model, that becomes very hard to do when you've got workloads running on-prem on a VMware stack, and then you're starting to deploy workloads into native public clouds, right? AWS, Azure, GCP. And again, they have a tremendous value, but they are also introducing a degree of complexity, because what we often see is, while some customers may fully evacuate their data centers, that is very hard to do, right? And so what we often see is customers ending up with, two IT control planes, right? One set of tools, teams, and people and processes to manage on-prem workloads, and then a completely different set of tools, teams, and skills and processes to manage, hyperscale workloads. So that introduces a degree of complexity, a degree of operational inconsistency, right? That introduces different security controls into different environments. That potentially introduces different levels of service levels, right? We know that there's a lot of fine print in the hyperscale public cloud SLAs, right? And it introduces the risk of, incompatible machine formats, right? The fact that we're going to probably have to rework those applications and those workloads into native public clouds. And so kind of at a big picture level, what that means for customers is, number one, decreased agility and lower time to value, right? Moving your environment into a hyperscale public cloud is a multi-year journey, right? We have lots and lots of data points that talk about the difficulty. Yes, there are going to be some environments that we can move fairly quickly and easily, but there are lots of applications that are very complex, that are very difficult to rework into those native clouds. So this is going to be a multi-year journey. Number two is, there certainly is some risk in terms of skills, right? 90% of customers reporting that they have a skills shortage when it comes to, modern infrastructure, cloud infrastructure, modern applications, right? And again, a great reason, right, to leverage a partner like Otava to kind of mitigate that risk. And then the last one there is, there's a real cost with that cloud migration journey. I think in some of the earlier sessions that we've done, webinars that we've done together, we've talked about the cost, time, and risk of either replatforming and or refactoring workloads, right? Not saying that you shouldn't do that, right? But you just need to be thoughtful about the business case, because there are going to be some times where it does make sense to do that, but there's going to be lots of cases where it just doesn't make sense. Gartner, IDC, both will tell you, a rough order of magnitude, $1,000 per VM, right? So again, that does introduce cost, time, and risk into the business. And so you just need to be thoughtful about, which workloads land where and what is your cloud migration strategy.
So I'll take a moment to make a public service announcement here. Patrick joined us a little while ago for a fairly in-depth review of total cost of ownership and operations analysis between hosted and public cloud architectures. That is located on otava.com website for your review. And that speaks really, I think, Patrick, to the higher cost point here, is we look at total cost of ownership and operations. But we haven't oftentimes considered is the cost of refactoring and the delay in realizing that return on the investment. So that's some good data points that we unpack in that pre-recorded webinar. I would encourage everyone here to take a few minutes when time permits and listen to that.
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk a little bit now, Patrick. We talked a little bit earlier about cloud native applications, right? And we see a sort of a confluence here between our mode one or traditional end-tier or classic application architectures and our mode two or cloud native environments. Can you help us understand a little bit about how these can influence or inform our multi-cloud journey and some of the considerations we should make when we're considering both of those two use cases?
Yeah, absolutely. And the concept of mode one versus mode two apps has been around for some time in the cloud industry, right? Originally pioneered by Gartner, I think, that concept. And what we're really saying here is, not every application is the same, right? Just like not every cloud is the same. And so when we talk about mode one applications, we're typically talking about, traditional end-tier apps, right? That generally are stable and have very low rates of change, right? They're supporting a core business function, right? It's a cash cow application, right? There isn't a lot of innovation or change happening to that application. And for those traditional apps, right, when you think about it, right, what's typically driving cloud adoption is things like, we want to reduce TCO, right? And like Jeremy said, we've done earlier webinars, right, where we've talked a little bit about the Otava TCO versus hyperscale TCO, right, where Otava can really help drive that TCO down for all of you. And we're also talking about things like how do we improve reliability? How do we get to better SLAs, right? Lots of customers with traditional apps are thinking about, how do I free up my staff and my resources, right, to focus on more important things? So I really want to leverage a partner like Otava to kind of come in and, deliver some of the core managed services that frees me up, right? So those are some of the big drivers around those traditional apps. And so that's where we start to think about, okay, do we want to retain those apps? Do we want to lift and shift them into an Otava cloud? Do we want to replatform them, maybe containerize parts of that application and modernize it without doing a big bang, right, transformation effort, right? So those are some of the characteristics that we see around those mode one apps. And then if we compare and contrast that to the mode two applications, right? These typically are going to be those new applications that are very fluid, right? With very high rates of change, right? And so typically what customers are looking for here are things like, we need time to value, right? We need to move quickly. We need to innovate. We need to build new feature functionality very quickly, right? And so this is much more about agile iteration and leveraging, new modern technologies. And this is where it might make sense to refactor into a microservices architecture, right? Or develop natively from scratch, leveraging some of those cloud native architectures and capabilities, or maybe to completely move to a SaaS-based offering to kind of accelerate that time to value. So again, the guidance here is think about your application estate, think about where your applications fit along these vectors, think about your cloud migration strategy. And again, you've got a partner like Otava that can help you navigate some of these questions. Right, so that's kind of the high level guidance that I would provide. Now, the last key point that I'll call out here, Jeremy, that I think is important is, kind of historically within the cloud industry, we often thought of, a bimodal strategy where maybe we were leveraging, mode one apps on a VMware stack and a VMware cloud and mode two in hyperscale public cloud. But I will tell all of you that that is starting to change, right? The industry is fundamentally starting to shift, where we are now starting to see mode one and mode two really come together and converge. And really the idea here is, how do we seamlessly enable customers to build, manage, and operate, mode two applications on the same stack, give the developers all the same tools that they're accustomed to using, right? But also give those IT admins all of the controls that they need, right, to bring these two worlds together into a more consolidated, integrated experience, right? There certainly is a big shift in the industry in terms of how we see these two worlds starting to come together.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So Patrick, help us think through how one could think about and execute a journey to multi-cloud.
Yeah. So this is I'm not going to unpack this full slide. There's a lot of detail here, right? But the key point here is number one is you want to start by understanding your application estate, all of the dependencies, the performance, the security risks that you have. Maybe you have that capability to do that yourself. Certainly Otava has the ability to come in and help you do that assessment. And really for each of those applications, start to think about what makes sense here, right? Are we going to retain it and optimize it? Are we going to lift and shift and rehost it? Are we going to replatform it, refactor it, right? There's lots of different permutations and paths available here. And, easier said than done, as always. Like I said, the devil's in the details, right? Take rehosting, for example, with lift and shift, right? We need to think a little bit about, are we going to do a cold, warm, or live migration, right? How many workloads, right? What are the characteristics of those workloads? What's the distance across which we are moving those workloads? What kind of migration technology are we going to use? Are we going to are we going to follow a manual process? Are we going to use some automation around that, right? There's quite a bit to unpack there, right? Just with the lift and shift approach. And then, right, that gets exacerbated with refactoring, where we introduce even a higher degree of complexity, right? Because I alluded to this earlier, right? Refactoring, in some cases, it's absolutely going to make complete sense to do that, right? Because it's going to unlock innovation, and it's going to free up the developers, and it's going to accelerate time to value, right? But there's always a trade-off decision, right? And one of the trade-offs that we have when we refactor into a microservices architecture is we are also introducing some complexity around networking and security, right? So now we need to think about, we've got all these microservices, how are they going to communicate with one another, and how are we going to secure all these services, right? So again, this is where, my guidance to all of you in the audience is be thoughtful, do that assessment, develop a migration strategy around each of your applications, and know that there are companies out there like Otava who can guide you and help you understand, these different paths.
Yeah, it strikes me, Patrick, that one of the trade-offs here that this brings to mind is overall operational cost and complexity, right? I think we could easily create a utopia with multiple silos or islands of services, but consuming and operating an environment of that level of complexity could be disadvantageous to us strategically long term. So how do we balance that strategic operations aspect with the technology of homing these application architectures in the right locations?
Yeah, absolutely.
So certainly good conversations, I think, to have
Yeah,
with anyone looking to embark on this journey.
absolutely.
So let's talk about making this process a little bit easier. Jason, you've been patient with me. I appreciate you joining us today. Do me a favor, walk the folks through a little bit about some of the services that we can help assist with to de-risk or simplify this journey.
I tell you what, I really like that previous slide. If you guys didn't take a screenshot of that, make sure you get one from the team here, because that really gives you the path to where you want to go. And what I'm going to talk about here really is the easiest path. So I'm just going to take that top bar, that top blue bar, as you saw in the previous graph, and kind of talk about some strategies that we do offer at Otava here to make that journey easier. We hear a lot of people saying, I still have all this on-prem workload. I have some legacy applications. How can you help us get to the cloud? So really the devil's in the details, as you hear Patrick say, and you'll see on the next slide, we're going to talk about some methodologies as we do to get those details, but it's really understanding the workload and getting that workload over to the right platform. So we facilitate that by using a tool like VMware availability, or VCAV. Migration to our cloud. Our clouds, our VMware platform. Most of, I know our audience, 80% of you are probably running VMware. There's an easy tool to get you into the cloud. And if you look here, reversibility, back out. Patrick mentioned that, hey, sometimes you think everything's going to be greener on the other side, but I don't want to be locked in. We give you that capability to also reverse that process as well. So that is key, guys, when you're on your journey to the cloud, making sure you get the right platform. Because there's a lot of things you just saw, a lot of paths to navigate, and understand that you have a path back out is very critical. With us, it's the same software stack, right, as in tools on premises for our VMware customers that are out there. So it's the same IT control plane. It's the same operating model. So a lot of similarities. You're not having to add different resources to your staff, not creating new positions to manage this. It really gives you a seamless integration and management piece, having that commonality across the clouds. No refactoring or reskilling or retooling. Kind of just touched on that. Refactoring, you don't have to. It's the same platform. We're running probably the same version, if not a newer version of the hypervisor than you are right now. So a lot of that's already in place. So we try to take the risk out of that by offering right now, and has been for quite some time, the best hypervisor out there. Predictability and lower TCO, and I know I get on vendor calls and they tell me, oh, your TCO is going to be a lower. And what do I say? Show me. So part of our process is we have a TCO calculator. We need your help to go through this as we enter this engagement to really understand your business model, your cost involved, so we can show you. And 9 times out of 10, and really it's pretty far up there on the percentage scale, that when we go through the TCO, every time you'll see the benefits of predictability and to be able to scale in the cloud at a lower price point. The broad OS support really is we're not really locked in to certain t-shirt sizes of OSs. If you want to bring your own ISO for your golden builds, you can do that, deploy those. You don't have to take, hey, here's a vanilla image. You have to deploy it, then build it up. So we really give you expansion on that. So you really want to look at that to save you time, so you're not rebuilding your golden images every time you make a deployment. And it goes along with the last two here. It's really custom size instances, and resource management is not t-shirt sizes, that you can actually build the resources according to your workload, according to your applications. You're not forced into a certain t-shirt size that may or may not be sized right, may cost you more money. And that's what we see a lot of, is that when we're reviewing the workloads, that more than likely they're paying more for the resources than they need to run that application. So custom size instances, the ability for flexible resource management and allocations of those resources to the proper workloads.
Thank you, Jason. Now you did mention a prescriptive methodology here. Let's walk through this a little bit. This is a quick and easy way for organizations to understand and realize a path forward in multi-cloud journey. But let's unpack some of the steps here and some of the value that this presents to organizations.
Yeah, where the rubber really meets the road and understanding the workloads is really step one. And I would say that's where a lot of the workload is, to really identify what cloud platform would be the best, what cloud consumption model would be the best for your workloads. It's really understanding that. Now I'm going to use some examples of what we do here and how we've helped customers understand that workload, is use different utilities that are out there. Utilities that you probably already familiar with, Live Optics, MyTrends, et cetera, VROPS, if you have that, to understand the workloads, the patterns of the workloads. And then we can identify that, evaluate that, and assign that to, or recommend a certain cloud platform or cloud model to serve that application, that workload. So a lot of the details, we spend a lot of time in step number one. Connect and migrate, I kind of mentioned a strategy to get into our cloud for virtual servers. We can do with physical servers as well. Like I mentioned, for the virtual, we're using availability to help us get in and back out should we need to. So we can easily scale and do a cold, warm, or live migration with these utilities. Secure and protect, very big right now with everything going on, especially with ransomware being top of mind for so many people. Visible on front pages, first story on the national news for the last couple of weeks. I really understand how you can build zero trust policies. So not just north and south type of restrictions and policies, but also east, west, and as well for those workloads that you need. We have different customers that are they serve different verticals, and we have some that will put these policies in place. So when they run the VM deployment, they already have this in place, so it's really secure, it's protected, it's quick, it's automated, and they're up and realizing time to value in no time at all. Optimize and automate and operate to scale. I'm going to get an example that covers both of these in one fell swoop here, is really understanding that workload and optimizing, because while we're going to do a lot of the work assessing and designing appropriately, something may have happened along that journey where either say your EMR was upgraded, or your financial team went to bi-monthly evaluations for all the data. You may have to optimize, and we give you the tools to do that, and make sure you have the tools to do that, to understand your workload so you can scale accordingly without just saying, I'm going to add 5 more CPU here, and another 64 gig of RAM, and hope that takes care of your problem. You can use this data to make informed decisions. And really, that goes along with operate and scale. And we'll show you some of our cloud consumption models here in a little bit of how to understand that, and so you can scale appropriately to your workloads.
And Sean, anything here from your perspective, the engineering technology side that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think I'll sum this up with really one thing: Cloud Verified, which really enables everything that we've just spoken about on this slide that Jason kind of elaborated on. So Cloud Verified is VMware's way of certifying providers like Otava, and you guys recently got your Cloud Verified badge, to say that all of these boxes along that journey, there's something that's going to cover the needs that you have, at that point. As Jason mentioned, availability is a solution for migrating, but it's not only for migrating, it's also for making, your solutions highly available, whether that's going from on-prem to Otava's cloud, between Otava's clouds, from Otava's cloud to on-prem. There's a lot of ways of covering off all of these boxes. NSX providing, a very granular approach to security. Again, to Jason's point, security is all about everything now. And East-West, from a historical point of view, is where a lot of problems happen inside the network. So leveraging NSX, being able to not only lock down the environment, but also use tools like vRealize operations to look at this and understand what's going on. It really kind of covers off the whole gambit of all those boxes that you're trying to do. Otava has deployed a modern cloud from a VMware perspective. It's really cutting edge in terms of where VMware is from a solutions perspective, and it really enables Otava to deliver solutions that are really world class and are going to help their customers on this journey, because it is a journey, right? It's really going to be something that is going to take time, but using Otava as a partner really helps achieve the goals that you have.
Got it. Thank you. So, folks, one of the things that we do want to do is sort of walk through Otava's vision and enablement of your cloud journey to a true multi-cloud strategy here. You've heard us talk about our Gen 3 cloud, or third generation cloud environment. This is what Sean just referenced as being VMware Cloud Verified. And this is really our foundation for organizations to realize that multi-cloud approach, right? Starting first with true hybridity, right? Prem to cloud, and the homing of workloads in whatever environment makes the most sense, up to and including disaster recovery or workload portability. And then introducing, again, connectivity into public cloud or hyperscale environments for application workloads that make sense to live in that environment. Cloud native or mode 2 or other PaaS-based consumption models. And providing organizations with the ability to share and communicate data and other critical information between islands in this picture, so that you are in fact consuming one unified architecture as opposed to multiple silos that you have to now sort of stitch together on your own. And that's, I think, one of the benefits and one of the real power behind the VMware vision is truly aligned to a multi-cloud consumption model with end user experience in mind, right? That's enabled from a consistent user experience, again, talking about control plane from hybrid perspective, and even into hyperscale data centers using VPC on AWS as an example, or similar services in Azure or GCE, as well as cloud native environments or native cloud workloads that live in those environments as well, connected through software-defined networking. So I think there's a good story here for many organizations seeking to realize a vision. The art form, and I think the first step of the journey, as we'll talk about here in a moment, is really setting forth and understanding what that should be for your workload requirements, your business requirements, your objectives, and your key performance indicators as they exist today. Jason, though, what I would like to do, though, is talk a little bit about our third gen consumption models here. Could you walk us through this a little bit and help organizations understand how they can consume services like this?
Sure. There's a reason for each of these, and we mentioned about the bimodal here, and bimodal's been around for many years now, and I'm sure everybody understands that. And really, the cloud native apps and the ability to the agility, the scalability, all the idiots that you want to have for that dev department to keep them off your back. Sorry for the DevOps folks that are on the call. But from the operations perspective of giving them the capability to do their job the best of their ability, we broke this out, keeping all the modes in perspective here, and really started out with a shared cloud, and really it's ideal for those variable workloads for that DevOps team. You pay for what you use when you use it. Now, I'm not going to go through each of the bullets here, but as you can read these on your own. I would and call us anytime if you want some more details on this. But really, what where we got these three different models is thinking about the bimodals, and then also the shared nothing mentality. So shared cloud, as I mentioned, is for those variable workloads. And as Patrick mentioned, what we are seeing that shift now. We are seeing that instead of having these different modes, why not, if you don't have the resources, let's consider a single mode. So we can bring that together in a reserved cloud format where we know that, hey, we know we're going to have these production apps that are stable. We're not going to use this much of compute resources every month. We may have a month in where we need to scale up, or we may want to include our DevOps team and have the ability to scale up and scale back down for a known cost here. And really, the reserved cloud gives you that capability of having that reserved capacity and the ability to scale up and down. So that's where the reserved cloud model comes into play. And then our private cloud consumption model is really a shared nothing. It's where I have these EMR applications and I need to run them constantly. I need to hit them this hard. The database needs to be running at this level, at this consumption rate, and a private cloud is shared nothing. So it kind of gives you a blend from the variable all the way to the dedicated with our cloud offerings.
Fantastic. And some of the, obviously if I'm in the audience, right, I'm going to be asking what's in it for me, right? What are some of the outcomes here? I'd like to go through just quickly, right? 2 use cases, right? For single use organizations for internal purposes, et cetera. Complexity is one of the key issues. We talked earlier on, Patrick brought up the concept of having to refactor applications going into hyperscale public cloud architectures, right? And the delay that refactor provides both in usability and in realization of investment. The ability to extend a VMware-based control plane into a true hybrid environment unlocks same operational process, procedure, and simplicity now in a true hybrid architecture. The other piece of this that I'd highlight is cost control. One of the things on the previous slide that we talked about is Otava has a unique blend of hybrid billing models where if we think about public cloud, and I'll ask you all to recall back to the big headlines, right, of NASA looking at ridiculous, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars worth of overages now in potentially in their Azure instances, were they to ever try to repatriate that information back into a data center. That type of an uncontrolled cost overrun is something that Otava mitigates specifically through a hybrid fixed fee and consumption-based model that we can explore more offline. And then last but not least, to both Jason and Sean's point, right, backup continuity, as well as delegation of control of appropriate business units, again, seek to reduce the overall cost and complexity of day-to-day operations, driving a faster realization of value. In the indirect channel, the same model. If you're taking products and services from Otava to your customers or your end state consumers, right, time to revenue becomes critical. If you're using VMware today, you probably already have a VMware service catalog. That catalog can be templatized and blueprinted within the Gen 3 environment out to all of your clients. Operational and cost control, again, eliminating or removing a lot of that variable cost gives us the ability to ensure that that you're not hit with unexpected cost overruns, which eat into your margins and bottom line. And last but not least, the ability to sell really a complete end-to-end solution that not only includes application hosting, which is sort of the foundation expected, right? But data protection to mitigate some of the security risks that we've seen lately, as well as continuity services to ensure that your end users never have to suffer outages based on unexpected events or occurrences. Happy to go into these in more detail, but I do want to wrap on some of the positioning here where we've been able to be validated and verified, in this case by Forrester against the Forrester Wave Report for private cloud. Excuse me, this was done back in 2020. In the Otava positioning here, you can see we're positioned extremely well against other vendors in the marketplace. And this really plays back specifically to what Sean's point was earlier around cloud verified, right? Being able to leverage the standard reference VMware architecture that includes all of the software-defined stack, so that organizations that are using a similar construct today can literally snap into a hybrid cloud model without the cost, complexity, or application refactoring delays that we typically see going into public or hyperscale instances. So key benefit here. Jason, anything here that you'd like to add or clarify?
Well, I think you touched on it, Jeremy. Really, it's cost predictability. It's reducing your risk. It's single control plane to manage, a familiar one at that. Really makes it the ease of use there. And I think that's the part of that visibility and that ease of use really put us up there in the quadrant as a strong performer.
Absolutely. I'm not going to cover this slide in depth, right? We are a cloud provider, obviously, as you've probably picked up on or are already aware of. But some of the reasons why I think really speak to a lot of the content in this discussion today, helping you move past some of the complexities and pitfalls in the journey towards multi-cloud, right? Giving you a side-by-side partner in that journey to walk through that standard methodology, to walk through that standard engagement process, and ensure that the end state that you're resolved to is truly delivering the value and the outcomes that you're expecting, and you're minimizing or eliminating a lot of the pitfalls or complexities along the realization of that journey. And last but not least, the ability to really meet the needs of the business, both from a technical aspect, but more importantly, from a business outcomes perspective, and having a clear understanding of the value and to Jason's earlier comment, total cost of ownership analysis, et cetera, along that journey progression. What I will challenge each of you with today is let's continue the conversation. This is not a 60-minute webinar content, right? This is the start of a longer conversation, and really to the point that Patrick made earlier on in the discussion around multiple routes to a multi-cloud strategy. Let us participate with you to help lay out what that journey could look like, and help plot and walk you through the steps in realizing the value that you expect and need to receive out of cloud. Again, higher cost, business agility, higher commercial differentiation, better end user self-servicing and responsiveness to the business needs and objectives, and most importantly, predictability in terms of performance, in terms of pricing, and business outcomes that you expect to get. We do have a 30-day free trial. Welcome to engage us with that as well. But the ask here really is let's continue the conversation around how we can help craft a journey to multi-cloud with partners like Patrick and Sean here from VMware to get you guys the outcomes that you're looking for and require. Now, with that said, folks, there hasn't been a whole lot of questions here, but I would open up to you. What are some of the concerns? What are some of the questions? Help us understand some of the thought processes that you all are going through. Feel free to use the QA session portion of the inquiry. You'll be kept confidential in that. But help us understand some of the things that are top of mind for you as you're thinking through your multi-cloud journey facing your organization today? All right, 30 seconds of awkward silence. Not a lot of Q&A, folks. Again, I'll reiterate, please feel free to engage us, right? We'd love to have a conversation. No pressure, no obligation. Let's just talk about what that journey could look like and see if there's some synergies there. Patrick, any closing thoughts from your perspective on sort of where we see sort of the next 6 to 12 in this, and positions of where VMware thinks that value can be added?
Yeah, I'll echo a little bit of what Sean said. I think Otava is very well aligned to VMware's vision and strategy. And they are a key partner for us. And I think we have very strong alignment. I'm very excited about the work that Otava is doing. And I know that, from our perspective, we see a real need, for all the reasons that we talked about, right? As customers start to embrace hybrid and multi-cloud strategies, right? Increasingly, what all of you need is a trusted partner who can guide you down that path, right? And as we work with Otava to extend their value proposition into customer data centers, into hyperscale data centers, right? I think that's going to really help give you a partnership with a cloud provider who can help you drive your business outcomes, help you on your digital transformation journey, wherever those workloads ultimately may land, right? So in that sense, I think, Otava is very well positioned to kind of capture, some of the emerging trends that we're starting to see around, hybrid and multi-cloud.
Perfect. Folks, to wrap up today, number one, I want to thank you again for your time this morning or this afternoon. We'll be following up this webinar with an email out to all of you with a recording of the presentation, as well as the slides reviewed today for your own consumption. So no screenshots necessary. And again, look forward to the conversation, folks. Keep us in mind, and as questions or thoughts come up, feel free to reach out to us at any point. We'd be happy to engage with you and add value. With that said, have a wonderful day. Enjoy, everybody.
Bye-bye.